Carathis 9 smelled like burnt copper in someone else's cooking. Cole Beckett had been on the station for 2 days and he still couldn't figure out which species was responsible for the smell. Something with too many legs, probably. Something that ate its food alive and didn't apologize for it. He stood at the back of a briefing room that wasn't built for human spines, his shoulders pressing into a wall, curved like the inside of a rib cage. Nate Harlow was up front talking to the team, gesturing at a holographic layout of the diplomatic quarter with the energy of a man who believed PowerPoint could prevent death. Four-person detail, Nate said. Auxiliary security for the Alari trade delegation. Their own guys handle the inner ring. We are the outer smile. Look professional. Stay visible, don't touch anything that glows. Danny Pratt, 22 and still shaped like someone who ate cereal for dinner, raised his hand. And GT, what's an Alari? And GT, Meg Collier, seated beside him, didn't look up from her rifle check. 7 FT tall, covered in something between shell and skin, run 41 star systems. Think of us the way you think of squirrels. And GT, I like squirrels, Danny said. And GT, they don't like you. Cole said nothing. He watched the hologram rotate. Corridors, checkpoints, sightlines. His brain mapped it the way water finds cracks without effort, without permission. 14 years of this. His body had learned the geometry of violence so thoroughly that peace felt like a room with no corners, nowhere to put his back. The contract was 5 days. Easy money. Glorified babysitting for a species that considered human security a political probe, a way for the Alari Empress to signal trust in the lesser races without actually trusting them with anything that mattered. Cole took the job because Bridger PMC told him to. He stayed because the alternative was a bunk on a transport ship in 8 hours, alone with his own head. The Alari arrived on the 3rd morning. Cole had seen Xeno diplomats before, Preth ambassadors who moved like oil on water. Suvani trade lords wrapped so much ceremonial fabric they looked like furniture. But the Alari were different. They entered a room and the room rearranged itself around them. Not out of fear, out of some gravitational instinct, like everything with a pulse understood it, was standing near something older and sharper than itself. The Empress came first, Drael Valoran. She walked the way continents drift, slow, inevitable, and entirely unconcerned with what was in the path. Her chitin skin caught the station light and threw it back in colors that didn't have names in English. Behind her, the Thorn Watch elite. Guard 8 of them, each one tall enough to make Cole feel like a medium-sized child. They moved in formation so tight it looked choreographed. Probably was. And then Sarethis Valoran walked behind her. Mother the way a blade sits in a sheath. Present still, and not even slightly relaxed. She was tall even for Alari. Her chitin was darker than the Empress's, shot through with ridges of deep violet that shifted when she turned her head. Her eyes, 4 of them, too large and too smaller, flanking, swept the room in a single pass. They did not stop on Cole. They did not stop on any of the humans. He might as well have been furniture. She's intense, Danny whispered. She's royalty, Nate muttered. Don't stare. Cole didn't stare, but he noticed the way she moved through the room. She'd already mapped the exits, every single one, and she dismissed them all. Not because she couldn't leave, because she didn't need to. 2 days of nothing, formal dinners, where humans sat at a separate table. That was technically the same height as the Ailery table, but somehow felt lower. Danny tried to start a conversation with a Thornwatch guard and received a look that could have stripped paint off a warship. Meg ran perimeter checks every 4 hours, because that was her love language. Nate filed reports and drank coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a radiator. Cole stood where he was told, watched what he was told to watch. His hands itched, his ribs ached from an old fracture that acted up when he was bored, which was his body's way of reminding him that boredom was just danger that hadn't introduced itself yet. Day 3. A closed-session banquet in the inner diplomatic hall. Gilt walls, low-lighting species Cole couldn't name, eating things Cole didn't want to identify. The Thornwatch ringed the Empress like a living fence. Sareth sat 4 seats to her mother's left, flanked by aides, positioned near a secondary corridor. Cole was posted at the far wall, 30 ft from the nearest Ailery. Decorative distance. He felt it before he saw it, a hitch in the room's rhythm. One of the service staff moving wrong. 2 direct, 2 purposeful hands not carrying anything. Then 2 more coming from the secondary corridor. Kithrani faces under stolen maintenance hoods. The Thornwatch turned toward the Empress, all of them training in priority and 8 bodies pivoting the wrong direction because protocol said, protect the crown, protect the crown, protect the crown. Sareth was 15 ft from the nearest guard. Cole didn't decide. His legs decided, every scar he'd earned in 14 years of other people's wars. Decided. He crossed the gap in a dead sprint, put his body between Sareth and the lead attacker, and caught a plasma bolt across the ribs that turned his flak vest into a smoking ruin. The pain was white, total. He filed it somewhere behind his teeth and kept moving. The first attacker's arm broke in 2 places. Cole felt the bones separate under his grip like green wood splitting. The second went down to a knee strike that Cole didn't remember throwing. The third made it 2 steps before Meg's rifle round caught him in the chest from across the room. 9 seconds start to finish. Cole stood in the aftermath, ribs leaking heat through his ruined vest, and did a perimeter check. Then another. Then he looked down at his hands and noticed they were shaking and closed them into fists so nobody else would notice. Beckett, Nate's voice somewhere behind him, sit down. Perimeter's not clear. Cole, sit down. He didn't sit down. A medic drone found him and started spraying sealant on his ribs while he stood there, scanning room, counting exits, doing the math his body always did when the world reminded him what it was. Across the room, behind a wall of reassembled Thornwatch, Sareth Valoran watched him, not with gratitude, not with shock, with something older than both. She turned to her aide, spoke a single sentence in formal Ilari, low. Private. The aide's eyes widened, all 6 of them, and then very carefully went blank. Lucy Voss, the human linguist, was across the hall, too far to hear. She saw Sareth's mouth move and felt, for reasons she couldn't name, that she had just missed something important. The Empress made a request that was not a request. Cole's team would remain embedded with the Alori delegation for the rest of the summit, not a decorative distance. Inside the inner ring, close enough to matter. Nate took the call from Bridger headquarters with the grin of a man watching his stock portfolio catch fire. In a good way. This is the kind of contract that builds careers, he told Cole. Play nice, look sharp. Try not to bleed on any more royalty. Cole's ribs were sealed under a layer of medical foam that itched like fire ants, had taken up residence inside his chest. Whoa! He could breathe mostly, he could move. Enough. The medic drone had flagged him for 48 hours of rest. Cole had flagged the medic drone for recycling. Sareth began speaking to him on the second day of the new arrangement. Not conversation. Conversation implied two people choosing to exchange words. This was something else, targeted, precise. She asked questions the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. Small cuts, specific locations, watching. What bled out? How long have you been a fighter? Long enough. Did you choose it? Does it matter? What does your body do when it is afraid? Cole looked at her. 4 eyes looked back, the 2 smaller ones flanking her. Temples didn't blink at the same rate as the larger pair. It was disorienting in a way that made his brain itch. Same thing it does when it's not afraid, he said. Moves. She considered this, filed it. Move to the next question, the way someone turns a page. He gave her half-truths and deflections, and the occasional honest answer, disguised as a joke, and she cataloged every single one with the focus of someone building a file. Cole had been studied before, by doctors, by Bridger commanding officers, by one Bridger psychologist who'd written the words functional but unexamined in his personnel record like it was a diagnosis. But Sareth studied him differently. She studied him like he was the first interesting thing she'd encountered in a very long time. Lucy Voss got pulled into the arrangement as a cultural liaison, which was a polite way of saying the only human who can read Alori body language. Without a manual, she was good at her job. Brown hair, sharp eyes, the kind of quiet confidence that came from spending a decade learning to think in languages that didn't map onto human emotion. She noticed the irregularity on day 2. Sareth's language around Cole had shifted, the verb forms she used when addressing him, or more accurately when referring to him in conversation with her aides, belonged to a grammatical register Lucy hadn't seen in standard diplomatic Alori. She flagged it, started cross-referencing with linguistic databases. The answer wasn't in the diplomatic archives. It was in the historical ones, the old ones, the ones that dealt with bonds and blood, and things that didn't break. She kept digging. Meanwhile, the political machinery of the summit ground forward. The assassination attempts had cracked something open. Trust, already thin between species who measured each other in terms of threat potential, had gone thinner. Accusations moved through back channels. The Kethrani denied involvement. The Alori didn't believe them. 3 minor delegations withdrew from the summit entirely, packing their ships in the middle of the night like families, leaving a bad neighborhood. And somewhere inside the Alori delegation, someone was feeding information outward. The Thorn Watch commander Rixus was the first to say it aloud. He stood in the security briefing like a Monument to suspicion, 9 ft of dark. Chitin and rigid posture and pointed. His accusation at the human team with the subtlety of a thrown brick. The mammals had access to corridor schedules. The mammals were positioned near the secondary entrance. The mammals stopped the attack, Nate said, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a man who had practiced not punching people larger than him, while your team was facing the wrong direction. Rixus's smaller eyes narrowed. His larger eyes didn't move. That was worse. Cole watched the exchange from the back of the room and said nothing. But he watched Rixus the way he watched everything that made the hairs on his neck stand up. With patience, with memory. On the 4th evening, Sarethi invited Cole to walk the observation deck. He went because the contract said comply with the principal's reasonable requests. He told himself that he went because the contract said so. The observation deck wrapped around the station's upper ring like a glass crown. Beyond the viewport, a binary star system poured light in 2 colors, amber and pale blue, and the combination painted everything on the deck in tones that didn't exist planetside. Sarethi walked beside him, her stride longer than his by a full step, but she matched his pace without being asked. I have studied 43 species, she said. Their combat responses, their fear architectures, their thresholds for self-preservation. Sounds like a fun weekend. She didn't smile. Alori didn't smile. But something in the way her head tilted suggested she'd heard the joke and chosen not to punish it. Every species I have studied runs a cost-benefit calculation before entering danger. The Keithrani weigh personal survival against tribal obligation. The Suvani calculate economic impact. Even the Thornwatch, my mother's finest, assess threat level before they commit. She stopped walking, turned to face him. All 4 eyes focused on his face. Humans skip that step. Cole leaned against the viewport railing. The amber star pulsed behind him. Maybe we're just bad at math. No, you are excellent at math. Your engineers built this station's gravity array. Your doctors invented the surgical foam holding your ribs together. Right now. She paused. You skipped the calculation because the calculation is irrelevant to you. The danger is there. The person is there. You move. There is no step between seeing the need and meeting it. She said it like she was describing a flaw, a mutation, a glitch in the human operating system that was so broken it accidentally produced something useful. I have a word for it in my language, she said, but the word is very old and it means something I do not think you are ready to hear. The blue star caught the edge of her chitin and turned it silver. It's not bravery, he said. What I did in that hall, it's not courage or honor or whatever your old word means. Then what is it? He looked out the viewport. The binary stars hung there, orbiting each other. A slow, permanent spiral held together by forces neither one had chosen. I just don't have anywhere else to be. The sentence landed on Sayareth like a stone dropped into water that had never been disturbed. She stood very still. Her smaller eyes blinked once. Her larger eyes didn't blink at all. She said nothing for a long time. Cole let the silence sit because he was good at silence. He'd had years of practice. When she finally spoke, it was in Alori. He didn't understand it. 3 hours later, Lucy Voss found the verb form. She was sitting cross-legged on her bunk, surrounded by holographic text panels, her coffee cold and forgotten on the floor beside her. The linguistic database had led her through diplomatic registers, then ceremonial registers, then into a subsection of Ailery law so old it predated their spaceflight era. The word was Valtherus. Lucy read the entry, read it again. Felt the blood leave her face in a slow, thorough retreat. She grabbed her comm unit and typed a message to Nate Harlow. Her fingers were steady, her pulse was not. We need to talk about what Valtherus means now tonight. Don't let Cole out of your sight. She put the comm down, picked up her cold coffee, put it down again because her hands wouldn't hold it still. Lucy laid it out in Nate's quarters at 2:00 in the morning, with the lights low and her voice lower, like the words themselves might hear her and make things worse. Valtherus, a claiming right under a Lori law, a member of the royal bloodline, could declare Valtherus over a non-a-Lori individual who had demonstrated through action, not words, an instinct to protect the royal without obligation or command. The declaration bound the individual to the royal's household, not as a servant, not as a spouse, something in between that the Lori language had a word for, and English did not. It carried legal weight across all 41 systems of the Dominion. It could not be refused by the claimed party. It could not be appealed through standard diplomatic channels, and once spoken in formal assembly, it was as binding as gravity. She can't do that, Cole said. He was standing by the door. He hadn't sat down since Lucy started talking. His face had the particular stillness of a man who was holding something inside his chest that was trying very hard to get out. She literally can, Nate said. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk, elbows on knees, coffee untouched. Lucy, when did this happen? This morning, the formal assembly. She spoke the declaration in ceremonial a Lori during the opening address. Cole was standing behind her in the security line. Lucy pulled up the recording on her data pad, scrubbed to the moment. Sayrit's voice filled the small room, low, formal, ancient syllables that sounded like stones being laid in a cathedral. Right here, this phrase, Valthers, Karun Seth, that's the binding syntax. She named him. I thought she was giving a commendation, Cole said. His voice was flat, controlled. The room looked at me. I nodded. You accepted it, Lucy said. Under their law, the nod constitutes acknowledgement, silence, the kind that has texture, the kind you could reach out and touch and cut your fingers on. So I'm what? Cole said. Property. It's not. The A-Lori don't frame it that way. For them, this is the highest honor a non-A-Lori can receive. You've been elevated to her personal household. Protected status, legal immunity across Dominion space. It's Lucy. Cole's voice hadn't risen. That was the frightening part. Did she know I wouldn't understand the words? Lucy looked at Nate. Nate looked at the floor. Yes, Lucy said she knew. Cole left the room. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with the care of someone who understood that if he started breaking things, he might not stop. The political fallout arrived with the morning cycle. Human ambassadors, already stretched thin by the summits, collapsing goodwill, scrambled to understand what had happened. Bridger PMC's legal team, operating from a corporate office 6 systems away, held 3 emergency calls in 4 hours. and produced nothing useful. The word Valtherus didn't appear in any Humanelary treaty. It predated the treaties, it predated contact. Empress watched the chaos from her private chambers with the expression of someone observing weather patterns. Interesting, distant, not her problem. Sareth attended her scheduled meetings, spoke to her aides, reviewed trade proposals. She did not ask about coal. She did not mention the Valtherus. She moved through the day as if she had done nothing more remarkable than adjust the temperature in her quarters. Cole found her in the late afternoon. She was in a private meeting room, alone, reviewing data on a holographic display. He walked in without announcement. Thorn watch guard at the door moved to stop him and then stopped himself. Because under Valtherus law, Cole had more right to enter that room than the guard did. Cole stood across the table from her. The holographic display floated between them, casting pale light across both their faces. "Did you know I wouldn't understand?" he asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you would have said no." She looked up from the display, all four eyes calm, certain. "And you would have been wrong." Cole stared at her. She stared back. Two species, two physiologies, two entirely different architectures of thought. And in that moment, the gap between them was not biological, it was moral. She had taken something from him, not his freedom exactly, but the shape of it, the illusion that he got to choose where he stood. He turned and walked out, same closed vista. Danny found him 40 minutes later in a maintenance corridor on sublevel 6. Cole was sitting on the floor between two cooling pipes, his back against the wall, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Danny didn't ask what was wrong. He sat down next to him, pulled a crumpled bag of pretzels from his cargo pocket and held it out. Cole took a pretzel. They sat there for 11 minutes. Cooling pipes hummed, neither of them spoke. Danny ate pretzels, and Cole held one pretzel and didn't eat it, and that was fine, that was enough. Nate and Lucy requested a formal audience with the Empress. It was granted. They were led through corridors that smelled like ozone and old stone into a chamber where Drael Val Aaron sat on a throne that grew from the floor like it had always been there, like the station had been built around it rather than the other way around. Lucy made the case, diplomatic language, careful framing, mutual respect, cultural misunderstanding, the possibility of a resolution that honored both species' legal traditions. The Empress listened the way mountains listen to wind. "Valtherus is not reversible," she said. Her voice was deep. It resonated in the chest, not the ears. "My daughter has spoken the binding words. Informal assembly, your man accepted. The bond is sealed." He didn't know what he was accepting. Nate said, "Ignorance does not void consent under Dominion law. It does under ours." The Empress tilted her head. The gesture was small, the weight of it was enormous. "You are not under your law. You are on Carthage 9, neutral ground. And on neutral ground the older law prevails." She paused, then almost as an afterthought, "My daughter has never invoked Valtherus before on anyone in 26 years of life." She let that fact sit in the room without explaining it. Lucy felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders like a coat she hadn't asked to wear. That night the Mole made their move. A data breach hit the Alori diplomatic servers, clean, professional, designed to look like a system error. Security protocols triggered a station-wide lockdown, blast doors. Sealed, lights shifted to emergency. Amber. And in the confusion, while the Thornwatch scrambled to secure the Empress and the human team scrambled to find each other, a single figure moved through the secondary corridors towards Sareth's position with the quiet purpose of someone who had rehearsed this walk many times. Cole was 3 corridors away when he heard it, not a sound, a silence. The specific silence of a room where someone has just stopped breathing. He ran. The assassin was a Lore, professional. Clean, they had a blade designed to slip between chitin plates, a weapon made for killing their own kind. They had gotten close enough to Sareth to put a hand on her shoulder before she twisted free. Cole came through the doorway at full speed and hit the assassin from the side. The blade meant for Sareth found a new target. It went into Cole's back just below the left shoulder blade, and he felt his lung collapse like a balloon with a hole in it. He kept fighting. 30 seconds on one lung, vision going gray at the edges, his body running on the kind of fuel that burns everything and leaves nothing behind. He broke the assassin's weapon arm, drove an elbow into their throat, put them on the ground and held them there until the Thornwatch arrived, which felt like an hour and was probably 40 seconds. Then his legs gave out. Sareth caught him, her hands hard chitin, warm underneath, closed around his arms as he went down. She lowered him to the floor with a care that her species was not supposed to show toward his. They took him, sealed the lung, stabilized the bleeding, moved him to the med bay, and hooked him to machines that beeped in frequencies tuned for human hearts. Sareth followed. She entered the med bay and sat in the chair beside his bed. Her aide appeared in the doorway, hesitant. "Do you need anything?" "No," she stayed. For 9 hours she did not stand, she did not speak. She watched the machines breathe for him and the monitors count his heartbeats. And she sat in that chair like it was the only place in 41 star systems she had any intention of being. Cole opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was Sareth. She was still in the chair, same position, same stillness. The station light had shifted from the cool blue of the night cycle to the pale gold of morning, and it caught the ridges of her chitin and turned them into something that looked like stained glass. "You look terrible," he said. She didn't, but it was the first thing that came to his mouth that wasn't a question or an accusation or a sound that would give away how strange it felt to wake up and find someone there. He'd woken up in medical bays before, field hospitals, recovery wards on ships. That smelled like disinfectant and regret. He always woke up alone. The absence of people beside his bed had become so normal that their presence felt like a foreign language. Sareth's head tilted, the small eyes blinked. The large ones held steady. "Your lung was repaired," the blade missed. "Your spine by Form, the medical team described this as fortunate. Form, that's practically a mile. It is not, it's a joke. It is not funny. Most of my jokes aren't." Something moved across her face. Not a smile. Lori didn't smile. But the plates around her mouth shifted a fraction, and Cole, who had spent his whole life reading bodies because bodies told the truth when mouths didn't, understood that the shift meant something close to warmth. Nate arrived an hour later with news that landed like a brick through a Window. The mole was Rithais, the Thornwatch commander, the 9FT, monument to Ilori military perfection, who had pointed his finger at the human team and called them mammals like the word was a weapon. Rithais had been feeding information to a faction of Ilori purists who believed the Empress's engagement with lesser species was a rot eating the Dominion. From the inside, the assassination attempts weren't about the summit, they were about proving that humans couldn't be trusted, that the diplomatic project was flawed, that the only safe universe was one where the Ilori stood alone at the top and everyone else stayed on the ground. He'd used Kathrani separatists for the first attack, plausible deniability. The second attempt had been his own people, Ilori operatives disguised as maintenance staff. The third, the one that put a blade in Cole's back, was a loyalist who Rithais had personally recruited from within Sareth's own household staff. The Thorn Watch arrested their own commander in his quarters. He did not resist. He stood at attention while they took his weapons and his rank insignia and his name, because in Ilori culture, a disgraced Thorn Watch officer lost their name. He became a silence where a person used to be, not at the betrayal. Betrayal was a known variable in politics, a weed that grew in every garden. She was furious at the incompetence. Her own elite guard compromised from the top. Her daughter's life endangered not by an external enemy, but by the internal rot of ideology dressed up as duty. She made no public statement. She didn't have to. The Thorn Watch's shame was louder than any speech. With the security threat resolved, the Valthers became the only fire left burning. Human diplomatic envoys filed formal protests through every channel available. The Ilori legal response was consistent and immovable. The declaration was valid, the acceptance was recorded, and Dominion law did not recognize retroactive withdrawal of consent based on linguistic misunderstanding. The word consent appeared in every human filing. It appeared in none of the Ilori responses. They had a different framework. In their framework, the act of protection was the consent. Cole's body moving between Sareth and danger had said yes in a language older than words. The Empress, in a gesture that her advisors described as generous and Lucy Voss described as strategic, offered a concession, a tribunal. If Cole could articulate under Ilori legal standards a case for dissolving the Valorous, the magistrates would hear it. Lucy spent 2 days coaching him. It went badly. You need to frame your argument around autonomy of service, Lucy said, pacing her quarters while Cole sat in a chair that was too small for him and stared at the ceiling. The Ilori respect the concept of chosen duty if you can demonstrate that your protection of Sareth's was an act of professional obligation rather than instinctive bond. She didn't ask me. That's not a legal argument under their system. She took my choice away. Consent of the claimed is not a recognized standard in Valerius law. The claimed party's willingness is considered irrelevant because the act of protection already. Lucy, she stopped pacing. I don't care about their legal standards, Cole said. He wasn't angry. His voice was level and his hands were still, and that was somehow worse than if he'd been shouting. She looked at me and decided I was hers. And she didn't ask. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. Lucy sat Down across from him, she was quiet for a moment. Then say that, she said, say it in a way they can hear. The tribunal convened in the Central Assembly chamber. The room was built for moments like this: high ceilings, curved walls, acoustics designed to make every word feel permanent. The Empress sat at the center of the magistrate panel, flanked by 3 Elori judges whose combined age exceeded Earth's recorded history. The full diplomatic assembly filled the gallery. Every species on Carathis 9 had sent observers. Sarethis sat in the front row. She had not spoken to Cole since he woke up in the med bay. She watched him enter the chamber the way she watched everything, with complete attention and no visible emotion. Cole stood before the panel. No uniform, no weapons. Just a man in borrowed clothes with medical foam still itching under shirt and a speech in his pocket that Lucy had written and he had memorized and was about to throw away. He threw it away in the first 30 seconds. I'm not going to argue your law, he said. I don't understand it well enough to argue it, and I'm not going to pretend I do. The magistrates shifted. The Empress didn't move. I'm going to tell you about a place called Nevada. He told them not much. He told them about a mining colony on a planet that humans had named after a desert because humans named everything after the places they'd already lost. He told them about being 15, about a morning that started with breakfast and ended with a Kathrani orbital strike that turned the ground to glass, about walking through a landscape that used to be a town and finding that everything, the houses, the roads, the people who hadn't made it out, had been fused into a smooth, shining surface that reflected the sky like a mirror. He told them about the next 14 years. Briefly, military mercenary contracts. He told them about other people deciding where he went, what he fought, what he was worth. He told them about the one thing he'd chosen, the single decision he'd made with his whole chest, which was that nobody would own him again. The room was silent, not the polite silence of an audience, the silence of a room where the air itself has decided to hold still. I would have protected her anyway, Cole said, without the contract, without the right, without any of it. Because that's what humans do. We don't need to be claimed to give a damn about someone. We just do. It's free. It's ours to give, and nobody gets to take it and call it something else. The Empress studied him. The magistrates conferred in low Elari, their voices like stones grinding together. Underwater, Sareth stood. The room turned, every head, every eye. Even the Empress looked at her daughter with an expression that might have been surprise, though on Elori features surprise looked the same as everything else, controlled, contained, and deeper than the surface suggested. Sareth spoke, formal Elori, the same ancient register she'd used to make the claim, but the words were different now. Lucy, sitting in the gallery with her datapad recording everything, translated in real time, her lips moving without sound. Revocation. Sareth Valoran revoked the Valthuris publicly, formally, before the full assembly and the magistrates and her mother and every species on the station. The gallery gasped, not a human gasp, a multi-species intake of breath that sounded like wind through a canyon. Revocation by the claimant was almost unheard of. It was considered a profound act of something the Elori had a word for that didn't translate. Lucy would spend 3 days trying to find The English equivalent. The closest she'd get was the opposite. Of pride, but that wasn't right either. It was bigger than that. It was the act of seeing your own power and choosing, in front of everyone, to put it down. Sareth left the chamber without looking at Cole. He stood there, unclaimed, unbound, free, in the legal sense of the word, and watched her go. His chest hurt, not the ribs, not the lungs, something behind them. 3 days after the tribunal, the summit began, folding itself up like a tent after a storm. Delegations packed, ships warmed there, engines in the docking bays. The corridors of Carathis 9, which had been thick with species and translators, and the particular tension of people trying not to start wars, grew quieter by the hour. Nate filed the final paperwork for Bridger PMC in his quarters, surrounded by empty coffee cups that formed a small city of caffeine and bad decisions. The contract was complete. Hazard bonuses had been approved. Danny was already packed, his bag sitting by the door with the neatness of someone who had never learned to accumulate things. Cole was not packed. His bag sat open on his bunk, half filled the way it had been since yesterday. He put a shirt in, taken it out, put it in again, taken it out again. Shirt was not the problem. The shirt had never been the problem. He left his quarters and walked the upper ring corridor toward the observation deck. His footsteps echoed against the curved walls. The station was emptying around him, and the emptiness made every sound larger, more honest, like a room after a party, when the only people left are the ones who actually live there. Sareth was already on the observation deck. She stood at the viewport where they'd walked 4 days ago. Beyond the glass, the gas giant Carathis hung in the blackness, a massive sphere of amber and rust, its surface churning with storms that had been spinning since before either of their species had learned to look up at the sky and wonder what was there. The light from the planet painted her chitin in warm tones that softened the edges of her. She didn't turn when he approached. She knew he was there. He could tell because the plates along her shoulders shifted, a fraction, not a flinch, not a welcome, an acknowledgement. He stood beside her, not close, not far, the distance of two people who hadn't figured out what the right distance was. For a while, neither of them spoke. The gas giant rotated in the viewport, patient, ancient, indifferent to whatever two small creatures on a station in its orbit were trying to say to each other. Sareth spoke first. I want you to understand something, she said. Her voice was different. Not the formal register of the tribunal, not the clinical precision of her questions. Something underneath both, raw, less practiced, like an instrument being played by someone who was very skilled, but had never performed this particular song. The Valtherus was not strategy. Cole looked at her. She kept her eyes on the gas giant. I watched you take a plasma bolt for someone you had known for 48 hours. I watched you stand up afterward and check the perimeter before you acknowledged that you were injured. And something inside me, something I was raised to believe did not exist, recognized you. She paused. The word recognized sat in the air between them like a held breath. Not as a protector, not as a tool, not as a soldier or a contract or a function. Her smaller eyes blinked. Her larger ones stayed open, fixed on the storms, as someone whose absence would leave a shape I could not fill. I did not know that shape existed until you were standing in it. She turned to face him. All four eyes, no mask, no diplomacy. Just a woman, alien armored, raised to Rule 41 star systems, standing in front of a man who had spent 14 years making sure nobody could reach him, and reaching anyway. I was wrong to take your choice, she said. It is the first time I have been wrong about anything that mattered. He stood there with his hands at his sides and his chest doing something complicated that had nothing to do with the healed lung and everything to do with the fact that someone was saying words to him that he had spent his entire adult life making sure no one would ever need to say. He was quiet for a long time. The gas giant turned. Its storms rearranged themselves. Nothing changed and everything changed. I didn't sleep, he said. Those 9 hours in the med bay. When you were sitting there. I was awake for most of it. Sareth's head tilted, the small familiar gesture. I kept my eyes closed, he said, because I didn't know what to do with someone staying. The sentence hung between them. It was the most honest thing Cole Beckett had said to another living being in 14 years. It cost him something to say it. He could feel the cost in his jaw, in his hands, in the part of his chest that wasn't ribs or lungs but the soft, stupid, unarmored thing behind them that he'd been pretending wasn't there since he was 15 years old, standing on a field of glass. Sareth took a step toward him, not a large step, not a claim, just a closing of distance that was as deliberate and as terrifying as anything either of them had ever done. Then I will stay, she said, until you do. No declaration, no right. No ancient words in a formal register that bound one person to another for law. An obligation and the machinery of empire. Just a sentence, ordinary, simple. The kind of thing people said to each other in every language on every world. And it meant what it always meant. I see you, I'm not leaving, the rest we figure out. Cole found Nate in his quarters and out. Later, Nate was zipping his bag, his terrible coffee growing cold on the nightstand, his face arranged in the particular expression of a man who had already figured out what was about to happen and was just waiting for it to say its name. I'm not getting on the transport, Cole said. Nate reached under his bunk and produced a second bag, packed, sealed. Cole's name written on the tag in Nate's handwriting. I know, Nate said. You packed my bag 3 days ago. Cole stared at him. Nate shrugged the shrug of a man who had known Cole Beckett for 6 years and had stopped being surprised by him 4 years ago. You're an idiot, Nate said. I know, Cole said. Nate handed him the bag. Their hands touched on the handle. Nate held on for a second longer than necessary. Not a handshake, not a goodbye, just a man holding on to his friend for one more second, because he understood in the quiet way that people who have served together understand things that some distances don't close again. Then he let go. The Empress summoned Cole that evening. Not to a tribunal, not to a formal chamber, to a private room, small by a lorry standards, which meant it was still the size of a basketball court. She sat in a chair that was not a throne but carried the same weight. Her chiton was darker in the low light, and she looked for the first time since Cole had seen her like someone who was tired of being the most powerful person in every room she entered. She asked him one question. What would you do for my daughter? Without obligation, without contract, and without a name for it. Cole stood before the Empress of 41 Systems, holding a bag packed by his best friend, wearing borrowed clothes that didn't fit, with medical foam itching under his shirt, and a lung that was 3 days old, and a heart that was doing something it hadn't done in 14 years. The same things I do with all three, he said. The Empress looked at him for a long time. She did not smile, but her aide, who had served her for 30 years and knew her face the way sailors know weather, would later tell Lucy Voss that it was the closest thing. Cole walked the corridor toward Sayers' quarters. No weapon on his hip, no legal framework, no ancient words. Just a man walking toward someone who hadn't asked him to stay, which was the entire reason he was staying, because the asking would have made it obligation. The absence of asking made it choice, and choice, he was beginning to understand, was the only currency that meant anything between two people who had spent their whole lives building walls. The door opens before he reached it. She'd known he was coming, on the transport pulling away from Carthage 9. Danny pressed his face to the viewport and watched the station shrink against the gas giant's amber glow. It got smaller, a city, a coin, a dot, a memory. What's he going to do out there? Danny asked. With a bunch of aliens. Nate sat across the aisle. He picked up his coffee, cold as always, because Nate Harlow had never once in his life finished a cup while it was still warm. He took a sip, made the face he always made, drank it anyway. Something stupid and brave, he said. Same as always. The transport jumped to light speed. Stars stretched, Carthage 9 vanished. And somewhere on a station orbiting a gas giant older than other species, man who'd spent 14 years making sure no one could reach him, sat across from a woman who'd spent 26 years believing she didn't need anyone to. Neither of them spoke.